They hand you the diploma, and everyone applauds, and for a moment, just one, just a breath, I am not standing in the Harrington University auditorium in a black gown with a gold cord around my neck. I am 7 years old again, standing in the hallway of Elmwood Elementary, and Mrs. Patterson is looking at my hair like it personally offended her. Summa Cum Laude. The words are printed on the paper in my hands. Latin for with highest praise. I know this because I know things now, many things I taught myself out of a hunger that began, if I am being honest, in that hallway, with that woman, and her look. My name is Elichen. My mother is Ghanaian. My father is Chinese American. I grew up in a suburb of Cleveland, where there were not many people who looked like either of my parents individually, let alone like the two of them combined into a child. I have my mother's dark skin and my father's eyes and, most significantly for the purposes of this story, my mother's hair, a crown of thick, coiled, black locks that have been, for as long as I can remember, both my inheritance and my battleground. I am 22 years old today. I am holding a piece of paper that says the university considers me, academically, among the best it has ever produced. And I am thinking, as I walk across this stage, of every person who looked at my head and saw a problem. I want to tell you about all of them. Not out of bitterness. I left bitterness behind somewhere around my sophomore year, when I finally understood that bitterness is just grief that hasn't found its direction yet. I want to tell you because the story of how I got here is inseparable from the story of what they did, and what they did is inseparable from who I became. You cannot have the diploma without the hallway. You cannot have the gold cord without Mrs. Patterson's look. So let me go back. Let me start at the beginning of the hair and work forward to today. This is going to be an interesting story, so sit back, grab a cup of coffee and journey with me. Please kindly hit that like and subscribe button. It is going to encourage us to give you stories such as this. My mother's name is Abina. She came to the United States from Accra at 24 on a scholarship to study biochemistry, which tells you something about her. The kind of woman who crosses an ocean at 24 with a suitcase and a scholarship and the absolute conviction that the world will make room for her because she intends to make room for herself. She met my father, James Chun, at a lab orientation in her second year. He was second-generation American, his grandparents having come from Guangdong province in the 1960s. He was quiet in the way of people who are paying close attention, and he found my mother's certainty both terrifying and irresistible, which is, she tells me, the correct response. They married when she was 27. I arrived when she was 29, impatient in the way I have always been, 3 weeks early and apparently furious about something from the moment I entered the world. My father says I came out already arguing. My mother did my hair from the beginning. This was not a small thing. It was a ritual, a transmission, a language she spoke to me every Sunday morning with her hands, and a jar of shea butter, and the particular patience of a woman who understands that hair is not simply hair. It is origin. It is continuity. It is, for black people, a form of speaking that requires no words. She started the locs when I was 5. By the time I was 7, they were established, thick, distinct, already long enough to brush my collar. My father watched this process with the respectful incomprehension of a man who understood he was witnessing something cultural and specific, and not entirely his to understand, though he loved it, and often said so. He called my hair my crown, which I did not fully appreciate at the time, but have thought about many times since. The crown was what Mrs. Patterson could not forgive. She was my second-grade teacher. She had taught at Elmwood Elementary for 22 years, and she had, in that time, developed a set of opinions about how children should present themselves that had calcified, over 2 decades, into something indistinguishable from policy. Neat. Tidy. Conventional. These were her words for what a child should look like. I learned them by their absence, by what she said when I did not meet them. The first time was a Tuesday in October. She stopped me in the hallway before class and looked at my head with an expression I did not yet have a name for. I know the name now, contempt dressed as concern. She asked me if my parents knew how to manage my hair properly. She used the word manage. She said it the way people say it when they mean control, when what they really mean is make it look less like what it is. I was 7. I told her my mama did my hair every Sunday. She made a sound in her throat that was not quite a word, and was not quite not a word. And then she let me into the classroom, and for the rest of that day she called on every other child before she called on me, which I noticed but could not yet explain. The second time was worse. There had been a visiting school photographer, the annual picture day that every elementary school runs, the one where they line you up and make you smile and send the photos home in envelopes that your mother keeps for 30 years. Mrs. Patterson pulled me from the line. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a hand on my shoulder and a word in the ear of the photographer's assistant. I was repositioned to the back row, partially behind a taller boy, so that in the class photograph that year, you can barely see my face. You can see my hair. It is visible above the shoulder of the boy in front of me, coiled and alive and exactly itself. I have looked at that photograph many times over the years. There is something I find both painful and clarifying about it. My hair was too present to fully hide, even when they tried. The third time, she sent a note home. I did not read the note. I was 7. I carried it home in my backpack and gave it to my mother without knowing what was in it, and I watched my mother's face as she read it. My mother has a face that is, under ordinary circumstances, very difficult to read. She has the quality of people who have lived through difficult things and learned to process internally before they display. But something moved across her face as she read that note. Something tightened and then slowly, deliberately released. She put the note on the kitchen counter. She made me a snack. She waited until my father came home, and then she had a conversation with him in their bedroom with the door closed. The kind of conversation that I could hear the shape of, but not the words. The kind where the rhythm tells you everything. The next morning she came to school with me. I sat in the hallway on the wooden bench outside the principal's office while she went in. I did not know what was said. I learned later, when I was older and she told me, that she had been precise and quiet and absolutely immovable. She had told the principal that her son's hair was his heritage. That no note, no photographer's repositioning, no look in a hallway would alter that. That if the school had a formal policy about hair, she expected to see it in writing, and that if they did not, she expected the matter to end. The principal was a man named Mr. Garvey, who had the look of someone who had been surprised many times in his career by parents who did not fold when expected. He folded. Mrs. Patterson left me alone after that. She did not become warm. She did not become fair. But she stopped touching my shoulder and she stopped sending notes home. And this, I understood even at 7, was a kind of victory. Not the full kind, not the kind you could be proud of, but the necessary kind. The kind that clears the ground so you can stand on it. The peers were different from the teachers. The teachers had power and wielded it with the particular cowardice of authority. Through paperwork, through repositioning, through looks that could always be denied. The peers were direct in the way that children are direct, which is to say, without mercy, without strategy, and without any understanding of how permanent their words would be. His name was Connor Briggs, and he was in my 4th grade class, and he had decided, for reasons I have never fully understood, that I was the thing he needed to be against. He started with the hair because the hair was visible, because it was different, because difference in elementary school is a thing that some children, the ones who have been taught, however subtly, that difference is a threat, cannot leave alone. He called it a mop. He called it a bird's nest. He called it other things that I will not repeat here, not because I have forgotten them. I have not forgotten any of them. They are stored somewhere in me with the precision of things you absorb before you have the language to process them, but because repeating them gives them a presence they no longer deserve. What he could not understand, and what I could not yet articulate, was that the hair was not a weakness. He was attacking the most defended part of me. Every Sunday morning my mother's hands had been in that hair, and with her hands had come her voice. Stories of her own mother, her grandmother, women who had worn their hair as a flag, as a refusal, as a declaration that they were entirely themselves and entirely unapologetic about it. You cannot insult something that has been consecrated. You can try. Connor tried. But he was throwing stones at a wall that had been built by love. That does not mean it didn't hurt. I want to be clear about this because I think people sometimes hear resilient stories and understand them as stories about people who didn't feel things. I felt everything. I went home some days hollowed out by the effort of existing in that school as the thing I was: black enough to be targeted, Chinese enough to be exoticized, mixed enough to belong fully to neither camp, which meant that the few other black kids in my grade sometimes kept their distance, not wanting the association, and the few Asian kids did the same, and Connor Briggs and his friends occupied the broad middle ground of an unchallenged majority. I felt it. I just didn't let it change the hair. There was a day in 5th grade. October again. October has always been a month with intentions, when a group of them cornered me near the gym lockers. Not violently, or not physically, but there were 5 of them and 1 of me, and Connor reached out and grabbed one of my locs and pulled it. Just once. Just to see what would happen. What happened was this. I looked at him. I did not cry. I did not pull away. I looked at him with a steadiness that I did not know I had until that moment. A steadiness that came from somewhere deep in my mother's Sunday mornings, and my father's quiet attention, and the particular chemistry of being 2 things at once in a world that wants you to be one thing or nothing. I looked at him until he let go. He called me something after that. His friends laughed. They moved on. But he had let go. And I had not moved. I have thought about that moment many times since, in the way you think about the moments that taught you who you are. I did not know that day that I was building something. But I was. Every day I walked into that school with my hair exactly as it was. I was building something. A spine. A self. A refusal so deep it had become architecture. Middle school brought new varieties of the same thing. The language became more sophisticated as the children did, which meant the cruelty became harder to name and therefore harder to address. Connor Briggs moved away in 6th grade. His family relocated to another state, and I watched his absence the way you watch weather change, with relief that has complicated edges because the storm shaped you and you are not entirely sure who you are without it. The school system took longer to change than any individual child. There was a dress code review in 7th grade. I learned about it from a notice sent to parents that included a discussion of hairstyles. The language was careful, the kind of care that is designed to exclude without appearing to, talking about professional appearance and neat presentation in terms that, as my mother immediately recognized, were pointed at a very specific kind of hair. She went to the school board meeting. My father went with her. I was not there. I was 13, and they thought it better I didn't sit in a room listening to adults debate whether my head was acceptable. But my mother recorded it on her phone and played it for me afterward, sitting at the kitchen table with cups of tea, the 2 of us listening together. I heard a woman in the meeting say that certain hairstyles were distracting. I heard my mother's voice in response, measured, impeccable, devastating. Ask the woman to specify which hairstyles, and then to explain what precisely they distracted from, and then to consider whether the distraction was located in the hair or in the discomfort of the people looking at it. The recording ends with the dress code revision being tabled indefinitely. I drank my tea and did not say anything for a while. My mother watched me. What I was thinking was something I did not yet have the full words for. I was thinking about the energy. About how much of my mother's time and precision and fire had been spent, over the years, defending something that should never have required defending. About what she might have done with that energy in a world that simply let her son exist. About the cost of it, the invisible, unacknowledged, relentless cost of being the person who has to explain, over and over, that they are allowed to be themselves. I told her, eventually, what I was thinking. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that I wrote in my journal that night, and have kept since. The cost is real, she said. And you can spend your life resenting who made you pay it, or you can spend your life making sure it bought something worth having. Those are not the only 2 choices, she said. But they are the main ones. I chose the second. Or I began choosing it, imperfectly, the way you choose things at 13, with enthusiasm and inconsistency, and the occasional backsliding into the first. But the direction was set. And direction, it turns out, matters more than speed. High school was the turning point, though not in the way turning points usually present themselves in stories. There was no single dramatic moment. There was no teacher who saw me and changed everything. No speech I gave that silenced a room. No confrontation that ended with the audience on my side. The turning point was quieter and slower than that. It was me, in the library. I had always been a reader. My father filled the house with books, history, science, philosophy, fiction from everywhere. And my mother filled it with conversation about what was in the books, which is a different and equally important thing. Reading was not an escape for me the way it is for some children, a door out of an unbearable present. It was more like accumulation. Every book added something to the structure I was building. Every idea that surprised me, every argument that made me reconsider, every story of someone who had carried something difficult, and carried it well, added another layer. In 9th grade, I discovered James Baldwin. This requires its own paragraph, because discovering Baldwin at 14 is a specific kind of experience that I think every black child should have, and most do not have early enough. He wrote about what it meant to be a target with such clarity, and such refusal to be diminished by the targeting, that reading him felt like being given a language I had been speaking without words for years. He wrote about the course my mother had named, and about what you could do with it. He was angry and elegant at the same time, which I had not known was possible, which gave me permission to be both. In 10th grade, I discovered my father's world more deliberately. My grandfather, my father's father, Papa we called him, though this is not technically the correct term, our family has always been casual with terminology, was still alive and sharp and enormously pleased that I was asking questions. I spent a summer with him going through boxes of photographs, letters in Cantonese that I could not read, and he translated slowly, stories about Guangdong and the immigration and the early years in America when his parents had been, in their own way, exactly as legible to the mainstream as I was, which is to say, not very. I began to understand something about inheritance that I had not understood before. I was not one story. I was at least two, maybe more, the Ghanaian story and the Chinese-American story and the American story and the story of being mixed in a world that prefers its categories clean. Each of these stories had its own tradition of resilience, its own archive of people who had been told they were wrong and had declined the verdict. I was not an anomaly. I was a continuation. My hair, in this light, looked different. Not just my mother's gift. Not just a battleground. It was a line of continuity stretching back through women I had never met but was made of women who had worn their hair in defiance and in pride and in the ordinary daily assertion of being themselves, which is, when you think about it, the most radical act available to a person who is being told they are not allowed to be themselves. I stopped apologizing for my hair in any of its forms. I had always kept it, always refused to cut it, but there is a difference between refusing to cut something and being proud of it. I became proud. This sounds simple. It was not simple. It was one of the harder things I have done, and I have done some hard things. The university acceptance letter came on a Friday in March of my senior year. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing calculus when my phone buzzed with the email notification. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the table and finished the calculus problem I was on, because I had been taught, by both of my parents, in their different ways, that you finish what you started before you celebrate. Then I called my mother into the kitchen and showed her the screen. She read it. She put the phone down. She did not say anything for a moment, and then she pulled me into a hug with the full force of a woman who has been holding something tight for a very long time and has decided, now, to let it be what it is. She smelled like shea butter and the dinner she was cooking, and all of my Sunday mornings at once. My father came in from the other room. He had heard something in the quality of the silence and had the good sense to investigate. My mother showed him the screen. He read it, and then he looked at me with the expression of a quiet man saying something enormous without words, and then he shook my hand, which is the most Chinese-American thing he has ever done, and which I found both funny and deeply moving at the same time. I went to Harrington University on a full academic scholarship. I studied biochemistry, which is my mother's field, and which I chose partly out of love, and partly out of the understanding that the best way to honor what someone gave you is sometimes to continue it. I minored in history, the history of the African diaspora and the history of Chinese immigration in America, pursued simultaneously, which my academic advisor found unusual and which I found necessary. College was not without difficulty. There were professors who looked past me in seminars, conversations where I watched people decide which box to put me in before they had finished listening to my sentence. There was a roommate freshman year who asked to touch my hair on the second day. Not maliciously, genuinely curious, which is its own category of exhausting. I told him no, which surprised him, and then I explained why, which I think actually changed something in him, because he became, over that year, one of the people I trusted most. Explaining yourself is work. I want to say that clearly. It is emotional labor and intellectual labor, and it comes out of the same limited reserve as everything else you are trying to do. There were days I was tired of it, days I resented that I had to be an education for the people around me while simultaneously educating myself. I said this to my mother on the phone one night, sophomore year, when the tiredness had piled up to a height I could not see over. She said, "You don't have to educate anyone who isn't asking. You are not responsible for other people's ignorance. Your job is to be fully yourself, as excellently as possible. Let excellence do the explaining." I wrote that down too. I have a lot of my mother's words written down. They form a kind of private archive, a parallel text to all the books. The words of a woman who distilled things I could find nowhere else. Junior year, I wrote a paper for my history seminar on hair politics in the African diaspora. The history of natural hair as resistance, from the antebellum period through the civil rights movement through the present day. I wrote it in 6 days, barely sleeping, in the particular fever of someone who has been building toward a subject their entire life without knowing it. My professor, Dr. Amara Osei-Bonsu, Ghanaian American, the first professor I had who looked at me and seemed to recognize something specific, read it and said nothing for a long moment after class. Then she said, "This is personal, isn't it?" I said yes. She said, "Good. The personal, written with rigor, is the most honest kind of scholarship." She recommended it for the university's undergraduate research award. It won. I stood at a podium in the same building where I will today receive my diploma, and I read from the paper, and I felt, for the first time, the full weight of the journey that had been required to stand there. The weight of every Sunday morning, every note sent home, every school board meeting my mother attended, so I would not have to, every loc that Connor Briggs grabbed and let go of when I did not flinch. I did not cry at the podium. I saved that for later, in my dorm room, alone, where I sat on the edge of my bed and finally let myself feel the full distance between the boy in the hallway and the young man at the podium. The distance was enormous. The distance was the whole of my life so far. I called my mother afterward. She already knew. Dr. Osei-Bonsu had emailed her, the two of them having apparently established a correspondence that I had not been informed of, which is exactly the kind of thing my mother would arrange without mentioning. We talked for an hour. She told me about her own first paper, her own first podium, the way it feels to finally be seen by the thing you were working toward. She told me that she had known, since the day she started my locs, that they would take me somewhere, that she had put intention into every twist, every morning, every jar of shea butter, the intention that her son would grow into himself so completely that there would be no room left for anyone else's definition of him. I have carried that with me every day since. Today, the auditorium is full. My parents are in the 3rd row. I can see them from the stage, my mother in a yellow dress that is doing exactly what she intended it to do, which is make her impossible to miss, and my father beside her in his careful way, straight-backed, hands in his lap, watching me with the expression he has had for 22 years every time I do something he always knew I could do. Papa is there too. He is 81, and he made the drive from Pittsburgh, and he is wearing his best suit, which he has been wearing on important occasions since 1987, and which fits him less well than it once did, but which he wears with such dignity that the fit becomes irrelevant. He does not travel easily anymore. He came. My hair is exactly what it is. Long now, longer than it has ever been. The locks are thick and settled, the way things are when they have been tended for a long time. I have been offered, over the years, many opinions about what I should do with it for formal occasions. I have taken none of these opinions. Today, as every day, my hair is my hair. My mother's hands and her mother's hands, and every woman before that who wore their truth on their head, because there was nowhere else in the world they were allowed to wear it. Summa Cum Laude. With highest praise. I think about Mrs. Patterson sometimes. I do not hate her. I am not certain she was a hateful person. I think she was a person shaped by a world that had told her certain things were wrong, and she had believed it, and she had passed it on, the way people pass on what they have not examined. I hope she is well. I hope she has, at some point in the years since 2nd grade, been given the opportunity to reconsider some of what she was told. I think about Connor Briggs too. Wherever he is, whatever he became. I think about the day he grabbed my loc, and I held his gaze until he let go, and I think about how that moment gave me something. The knowledge that I would not be moved. That knowledge has served me in every hard room I have been in since. So in a strange accounting, I owe him something. Not gratitude exactly, but acknowledgement. He handed me a version of myself I might not have found as early without him. The dean reads my name, and I walk across the stage, and I take the diploma, and I shake the hand that is offered to me, and I smile for the photograph, fully in the frame, in the center, my hair exactly as it is, my face exactly as it is, more myself at this moment than I have ever been. My mother is on her feet before I reach the other side of the stage. I can hear her from where I am. She is not a quiet woman when she has decided to be loud, my mother, and she has decided. My father stands beside her, clapping with the steady rhythm of a man who has been waiting for this for 22 years and intends to do it properly. Papa raises one hand in a gesture that is neither a wave nor a salute, but something of both. An acknowledgement from one generation to the next, a passing of something that does not have a name, but that I will carry forward. I hold the diploma, and I think, this is what becomes of a boy who did not cut his hair. This is what becomes of a mother who put intention into every twist. This is what becomes of people who decide that the cost will buy something worth having, and then go about making sure that it does. The applause comes down like rain. I stand in it. I let it reach me. I do not look away.